For those of you that watch Perspective El Paso, you know that I'm Professor Leon Blevins, Professor of Government at El Paso Community College. Welcome to another program. Now what I'm doing now is a short series of the 40 years of El Paso Community College. So I've gone back into the archives of real people and invited some of the people that have been here for an awful long time. I've been here, this is 2009, late 2009, and I've been here in my 37th year. Well, I brought with me today a special guest, Blaine Nelson, also teaches government. Blaine, welcome to Perspectives El Paso.
Thank you, Leon. Good to be here.
How long have you been here? When did you come?
In August of 1973, so I'm in my 36th year.
Okay, that was just a year after I came to El Paso Community College. Well, let's start with, how did you get here? How did you get this job?
Well, actually, it's my understanding that 1973 was the first year that the college went out looking for people elsewhere. And when I was at University of Arizona in Tucson, Margaret Haddad was the one that came on campus and interviewed. And at the very end of the day, I noticed the announcement, and I called her, and she was about ready to go to the airport to go to her next location. And I impressed upon her my desire to meet with her, and so she agreed to meet with me, and so we touched base. I didn't hear, and so finally my wife said, "If you want it, go get it." And so I got in the car one Saturday afternoon, and drove down to El Paso, got a room, and reconnoitered on Sunday, and then came in on Monday, and came on campus and expressed my interest in the position and what was the status of it and so forth. And people got me to Gerald Money, and Mr. Gerald Money sat me down, listened to me, and all of a sudden he said, "Wait here." And he was gone about maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and he came back and he said, "I want you to go see Leon Blevins, and then I've got scheduled for you to see Joe Hendricks, the dean, and President De Los Santos, and then you come back to me." And so I was on my way doing interviews that I wasn't really expecting to do.
And we recommended that you be hired.
Apparently so.
That's almost a replay of the way that I ended up here, because I made a trip shaking the bushes to see if I could get a job earlier, and ended up almost the same kind of thing happened then, except the only one that interviewed me was, well, two, Dr. De Los Santos and Gerald Money. And it was, if I remember, it was during the Easter break or spring break, one of those situations. So here we are, all these years later. We are survivors.
Yeah, indeed we are.
And I understand that you, all of a sudden they said you're ready to go, and in a very short time they were asking you to go in the classroom and teach.
Yeah, when I left and went back to Tucson, I didn't hear. And so I was assuming I was going on to another year toward a PhD, when on Friday morning, very early in the morning for us, Gerald called and said, "We've got a job for you. Do you want it?" And I was still in bed waking up when I took the call, and I leaned over and mentioned to my wife that there was a job available, and then Gerald said, "You know, I can only offer it to you if you can make it to the first class day next week." And so I commiserated, and my wife said, "Okay, go for it." And so I did, and then we had a hellacious transfer
Right.
from here, but I got over here.
Now you need to tell us a little bit about your wife. I remember when you came, and we got acquainted with you and your wife, and she was asking about employment. And I simply said, "Well, why don't you apply here at Community College? It's a growing institution, and with your background and office and all this." And she applied, and she's still here. Tell us about Nancy.
Well, Nancy is the Associate Vice President for Employee Relations at this point. Works a whole lot harder on a 12-month contract than you and I do on our 9-month contract. And she began on November of '73, after I arrived in August of '73.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about the early days of structuring the college. Leila McDonald, who was our dean for a while, she said something like, "Aren't you glad that we're getting in on the ground floor of a new institution and we can grow with the institution. Didn't you feel the same way?
Absolutely. The reason why I have remained is because this institution was vibrant enough to allow us to redevelop ourselves and remake ourselves over and over and over again. And you don't find that in staid bureaucratic institutions that are completely established and so forth.
And this being a 2-year institution was very different than a 4-year university institution.
Actually, it's what I was looking for.
Okay.
I did not make application to senior institution.
All right. What about things that you did to help start the school? We served on some committees. What committees, what positions? Didn't you serve for a while as faculty president, faculty president?
Actually, I was here for 1 year, and you mentioned Leela McDonald and Gerald Money came to me and said, we'd like you to run for the president of the Faculty Association, which was then the Joint Faculty Administration Association.
Okay.
And I demurred for quite a while, and finally I said okay, and succeeded in winning.
And I served as your parliamentarian for a while.
Indeed, you did.
Interesting.
And we had individuals like Tomas Enriquez and Joe Martinez and Lawrence Milborn, who were chairmen of different committees, who are still with us today also.
Right. Didn't you have something to do with
and Ted Johnston?
Oh yeah, Ted Johnston. There's so many we could mention. We just hardly have time to mention them. Jeff Coles, people like this.
He wasn't active in that, but yes, he was around and
helped get some things started, such as the literary magazine or something.
Exactly,
like that.
That's right.
Didn't you help do the policies for faculty evaluation or student evaluation of faculty or something of that?
In my capacity as president of the Faculty Association, yes.
Okay. Anything on curriculum, developing programs?
Oh goodness. When I was the discipline coordinator for the political science discipline at that time, there was an effort made after they hired Ted Martinez, and he was developing programs on the technical side. We took the opportunity to try to develop programs on the academic side as well, and I promoted a 2-year Associate of Arts program in political science, and it was successful and ran until 1986 or 7, when changes at the Texas state level required us to lay the program down.
Okay. Now there was a time that you were my dean, social science dean.
Indeed, I was, right.
How long did you do that?
5 years, from 1985 to 1990.
All right. Any things you felt you did there to change the direction we were going in social science, or any reorganization taking place during your tenure as dean?
One of the programs that was really a valuable program, I think, was a travel and learning program that Tom Myers came to me and requested. And this program would be led by one or more faculty people that would take students into southern Mexico, and they would have their studies in the hotels before they would go on site to the various Aztec pyramids and ruins
creative.
And so forth.
That's creative.
And as a matter of fact, 1 year, Beth Lindquist, instructor of history, went along as well. So the students got 6 hours. They got 3 hours of anthropology and 3 hours of history, along with the actual experience of going into Mexico and so forth.
Very good.
So that was a good program, and it lasted the entire time that I was responsible for it, and then it was laid down perhaps 2 years after I left office.
I have mentioned you on some of the other programs that I've done with regard to the bond issue and getting money for building buildings at El Paso Community College, because we remember that the college was created, a board was elected, bond issue was voted on and turned down by the voters. They didn't want taxes to increase. They voted on again, And then the third time, you led us in putting together that bond issue that was successful, which gave us the money for the buildings. Of course, it means the taxpayers pay taxes every year.
Indeed.
You want to say something about that? Because we're going on the record here, 40 years. What about that as a significant achievement?
Well, it certainly was a high point in my professional life, without doubt. You give me too much credit for being the one that was responsible for.
Well, I've mentioned it was no solo effort. It was an effort on the part of a lot of people, but you helped pull us together and direct us. And,
Indeed.
And you got some demographers to come in and help show us statistics on how to develop that bond issue, right?
Yeah, there were two demographers that came in at the request of President De Los Santos, and they laid out the intellectual program, and then I built the questionnaire and laid out the precinct organization.
Right.
And you, as I recall, were participating in that.
Right. I volunteered to take the east side and help with your statistics and getting people to turn out. And Margaret Langford said she'd work the west side. So then we got a lot of other people to work with us to do
Indeed,
this.
yeah. The thing that opened up for me on a personal level was that when I was asked to do this, I was asked to simply do a survey, and I didn't realize the import of it until midsummer. And by that time, Dr. De Los Santos was taking me to the planning sessions for the steering committee of what was to become the bond election in the fall. And so I fell into that on a regular basis. And this consisted of a number of politicos from the community that I got to become friendly with, and a number of people from the Board of Trustees that I got to know, as well as Dr. De Los Santos and Joe Hendricks from the college. And the biggest argument was over what day. And it was very interesting to see how the strategy was in terms of people who knew the community, the kind of question it was. They were saying you cannot have the bond election after the property tax bills come out. The property tax bills come out in the middle of October. And so you have to have it before the middle of October. And then the issue is, how do you figure it out? What the day is. And Dean Joe Hendricks was arguing for a Tuesday because his research suggested that most successful bond elections occurred on a Tuesday. And I argued for a Saturday because I thought we would not be successful without the assistance of the students.
Right.
And we could not release students from class during the day in order to do this without getting negative press. So I argued for the Saturday. Eventually, Dr. De Los Santos made the decision it would be Saturday, the 21st of September. And we were good to go. Yeah.
I usually don't read much on this program, but I do want to read something here. I pulled up some newspaper articles. I showed these to you before we went on air. And this one says EPCC's $19.7 million bond election passed. We had the election, but then it was challenged and went to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yes.
And the decision was written by the very famous Thurgood Marshall, the first African American on the U.S. Supreme Court. And it was dealing with the state law in Texas with regard to voting on bond issues. And non-property owners were discriminated against. Their vote was not as good as the property owners. And so I recalled out of my head, and now I have it here in front of me, that property owner vote, well, in this bond issue was 9,734 against the bonds being floated, and 9,614 for. So we were told we lost the election because the property owners had the voice on that. You had to win a majority of all the votes in the county on the issue and the majority of the property owners' votes in the boxes. But then we, in the case, property and non-property vote grand total altogether, it was 11,563 to 10,169 in our favor when you put them all together for a margin of 1,394. So our lawyers, Mark Berry and Ed Dunbar, were arguing eventually before the U.S. Supreme Court attached to a case from Fort Worth on a library bond issue. And the Supreme Court looked at it and said, Texas, your law is unconstitutional. You're discriminating against non-property owners in these kind of elections. Didn't that make you feel good?
Absolutely. The end of property tax limitations and so forth, property qualifications. Yeah, that made me feel very good as an ancillary effect, as well as succeeding and establishing a permanent tax base for the college.
I bet you teach about this in your government classes,
Hello.
don't you? Hill versus Stone.
Hill versus Stone, that's right. That's right.
Well, I recently had Joe Foster on, who was our first chairman of the Board of Trustees, and he mentioned this, that he actually went to Washington, D.C. and sat there in the Supreme Court building and heard the argument.
Did he?
Where the Fort Worth lawyers were there and our lawyers were there and arguing, and the Supreme Court, by I think it was a 5-3 vote or something, said that the law was unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm.
So you helped us make history, Blaine Nelson.
In another effort that we tried out, because we understood this requirement, was that we went down. I went down to the tax assessor collector at the time, D. Clark Hughes, and had an interview with him. And I asked him what it meant to be a property owner. Mm-hmm. And he said anybody that renders property is a property owner. It's not just a homeowner.
Right.
And I said, can you be more specific? And he said, if somebody renders a bobby pin worth 3 cents for tax purposes, they are a property owner. And I got in my head, well, what we ought to do then is to deputize students and ask that they have students render property, like a bicycle or a watch or what have you.
I remember radios were being rendered as property.
Yeah. And so that was an effort to try to win within the system in terms of of the property owner ballots. But we lost by, what was that, 1,000 votes or less?
Yeah.
That way. So it was good that we had the Supreme Court where it was at the time.
Okay, now let's move up to more modern times. You've been one of the innovators here with distance learning or online classes.
Yes.
So our time is going very, very fast, so we've talked about way back in the early history, a little bit of the development of curriculum and so on. Now talk to us about face-to-face classes versus online classes and how you've been doing with internet.
Well, actually, I got started before the college got started on this, and I had this real desire to move forward, and so I went to my my dean, and that was Miss Strickland at the time, and she and Betty Wheeler were able to get a block of money together in order to equip a room with computers so that I could have a classroom computer center out at Trans Mountain campus. And then I went in and taught it as a hybrid class where we met together, and we would, it was a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, and so on Mondays and Wednesdays we would lecture and discuss the textbook, and on Fridays would be opportunity for them to do their work through the internet. Mm-hmm. And I had to come up with various kinds of off-campus third-party free email systems for them to use and so forth, and that proved to be so positive in my mind in terms of getting everybody to be active in class and not sitting back and not being active, that I requested to do it again and refine it a bit, and then the next year the college got into it and began having the formal program. And so I was one of the first 7 faculty members that signed up to work within the college's program.
Well, I remember you taking a lot of computer courses. You were having to try to stay ahead of the curve, and some of the students were probably learning faster than you were learning.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's right, that's right. But it's been about 10 years now that I've invested, and I have thoroughly enjoyed it. It energizes me. And I think that, well, if I look back, it serves various student populations that simply hadn't been served before.
Right.
I can recall when we had our children and they were young and in need of attention, there was an inability for, at that point, Nancy to be able to pursue her coursework and so forth.
Because you were going to a building and going to classes.
Yes, that's right. And now you have people who are pregnant and expecting to deliver before the class is over with. You have brand new mamas and dads and stay-at-home folks that are able to multitask and study while the kids are asleep and then do their work online and so forth and continue their education. A good number of professionally engaged people who can go to work an hour before and use the computer or that kind of thing and not have to leave their work in order to make a choice to go to college. They can do both. And certainly the active military personnel. We have a large number of active military personnel. And National Guard people. When the hurricane hit a year and a half ago down in Galveston, I had like 6 folks that were in class that just picked up their computers and went on down and were able to continue pursuing the class.
You sound like you've just given a very good advertisement about online classes.
Well, here's an interesting story. When I was teaching out at Fort Bliss, when George Bush went in to get Noriega out of Panama, overnight, they can't tell me in advance what's going to happen like that. And overnight, I lost my class. I walked in and there were like 3 students left and they were all spouses. Mm-hmm. And they said that everybody had gone off to Panama. Right. And then we continued the class and like 10 weeks later or so, here they all come back again. And I have to figure out how to deal with these people. Right. And so forth. Well, now you don't have that kind of problem.
There's a continuum.
There's a continuation. They can take their materials with them and continue on site down there. So it makes a big difference.
Yeah. Have you been surprised about how large El Paso Community College has become and the various campuses that we have? Would you have thought of that back in 1973?
Well, it's kind of difficult. It was 3,700 students when I arrived, but given the nature of El Paso, I am not at all surprised that the growth has taken place.
Right, and you've touched an awful lot of lives. You mentor some of your colleagues, don't you, on how to do online courses?
I have.
Because I know we have several now.
When are we going to get together, Leon?
Oh my, I'm too much of an actor, a face-to-face kind of person to be online. I'm still trying to learn the internet. Is there such a thing as an internet? No, I get a lot of good information off the internet, but I'm still very comfortable going into the classroom and having a good time doing that.
Well, I need to tell you that the software that supports the internet teaching is becoming far more efficient.
User-friendly.
Much more user-friendly.
Right.
And so it doesn't require a technical nerd to get in and do that kind
well,
of thing.
I had so many computers that crashed and crashed and crashed and
Yeah.
crashed, and it just made me skittish about trying to do some of that. Have you ever had a crash where you had some student records and things that you had to recover or something?
I have probably had 3 or 4 crashes over my lifetime of computers, yes.
Okay.
It's not a matter of if a hard drive is going to crash, it's a matter of when they're going to crash.
So you need plenty of backup.
But now they have much more easy and reliable backups, even online backups.
Okay.
So you can have if you use Norton or other similar devices, they will store your materials on their servers up there and have them backed up in case of a disaster on your own.
Okay, we have just a few minutes left, maybe 4 minutes left in this program. Any closing thoughts on things you'd like to do, things that you have in mind that you've been thinking about you wanted to do and haven't had a chance to do it yet in your educational career, your teaching career?
Well, I think I'm pretty satisfied with my own career. I think that when the time comes for me to look at other pastures, I might like to teach some lifelong learning classes that would focus upon issues that are more of a central nature of mine,
Right.
concern of mine, and where the almighty dollar isn't important in the process.
Very good answer. Very good.
Yeah.
And of course, I know that you've been to the Caribbean a number of times. Maybe you could teach online from the Caribbean.
I have.
Oh, you have?
Yes, I have. Yeah, we've been going down there, maybe the last 15 or 17 years, something like that, or maybe not quite that long.
But that's your therapy. That's your stress reduction, right?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And I have yacht clubs that have good internet service and so forth that I can go into and use on a weekly basis, and it's a very nice environment.
Well, of course, we're still going to meetings together. We have regular faculty meetings, total faculty and social science, and then the government departments. You teach on a different campus than I do now. For years, we were just down the hall from each other.
Mm-hmm.
So I miss seeing you on a regular basis and getting to visit with you as before. But I do want you to know that I appreciate having you here with me as a colleague, and Nancy, your wife, on board with El Paso Community College. And this has been wonderful.
And I appreciate the assistance and support you provided to me and Shanna's provided to us over these last number of years also.
A mutual admiration society, nothing wrong with that in our time. Too many people are fighting all the time. And so Blaine, it's been great to have you here on the Community College Perspectives, El Paso. Maybe you can come back and discuss something else sometime rather than community college. We can dig deeper into some other subject. Politics, how about that?
How about?
I've had some of our colleagues on to talk about elections, and so when we have some elections coming up, we should have some hot ones coming up in the near future, and we can talk about politics in the United States, Texas, and even in El Paso. For those of you that watch, you've seen another interesting program. Now maybe you'll remember Blaine Nelson, who made a difference in the life of El Paso Community College. Tune in again for another Perspectives El Paso.